Hey everybody, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe. And as always, I'm ready to dive into some seriously juicy info with you all today. It's like we're mixing up a knowledge cocktail here. Strong stuff, but oh, so smooth going down.
And I'm Sunny, your friendly neighborhood fact checker. I'll make sure we get all the ingredients right. Speaking of mixing things up, you know it's always a good blend? Travel whiskey and discovering awesome new things. You have to check out our friend Micky's YouTube channel, Mickytolife.
Yeah, Mickey's the best. He's always got something cool going on.
Okay, so, you know those weeks where you're like, wait a second, were my jeans always this snug?
Yeah, like suddenly they've decided to shrink in the wash, even though you swear you haven't changed a thing.
Right. It's like the mystery of the ever-expanding waistline. It's got to be one of life's greatest unsolved puzzles.
Totally. And it's a puzzle that spawned a whole industry, right? Diets, workouts, pills, you name it all, promising that magic solution to a slimmer us.
Exactly. And that brings us to the big question we're diving into today. Is insulin actually the big bad wolf making us gain weight? I mean, we hear so much about it these days.
Oh yeah, insulin's definitely gotten a bad rap in some circles. So for this deep dive, we went deep into the research. Like really deep. We've got studies on everything from how our bodies process food to the surprising history of body image. Because, believe it or not, being a little rounder was actually considered beautiful in certain eras.
It's true. It's wild how much our perceptions have changed. So what we're aiming for today is to get beyond the quick fix mentality and really understand the science behind weight gain and insulin's role in all of it.
Right, because for you, dear listener, this is about knowledge. It's about understanding why our bodies store and use energy the way they do so you can make informed choices, not just follow the latest fad.
Okay, let's get into it. First up, we got to address the elephant in the room, or maybe the extra pounds on our hips. It feels like more and more people are struggling with weight these days.
For sure. And, you know, one of the biggest changes in our diets, even just compared to a few decades ago, has been this explosion of ultra-processed foods. UPFs, as the scientists call them. It's kind of scary how much of what we eat falls into this category.
Scary is right. How much are we talking about?
Well, in the U.S., research suggests that UPFs make up something like 60% of the average person's daily calories.
60%? Seriously? So like more than half of what we're putting in our mouths is this highly processed stuff.
Yep. It's kind of mind-blowing when you start to think about it.
Okay, so big picture, not great. But what does the science actually say about how these UPFs affect our bodies? Like, what do they do to us?
There was this fascinating study done at the NIH back in 2019, led by a researcher named Kevin Hall. They basically wanted to compare what happens when people eat a diet high in UPFs versus a diet made up of mostly unprocessed foods.
Okay, so processed versus whole foods, classic showdown.
Exactly. And they only did this for 2 weeks, which I thought was interesting. But even in that short time, the results were pretty dramatic. The group eating the UPFs ended up eating about 500 more calories each day than the unprocessed food group. And, you guessed it, they gained weight. Both weight and body fat, actually.
500 extra calories a day. Wow. That's like an entire extra meal for some people.
Right. And over just 2 weeks, that's a pretty significant difference. Meanwhile, the group eating the unprocessed foods actually lost a little bit of weight.
Okay, so it's not just about like swapping a burger for a salad. It's deeper than that. It's about the ingredients themselves, how much they've been messed with.
Exactly. It's about the fact that UPFs are often packed with calories, but they don't really fill you up. Like, think about it. You could easily down a bag of chips and still be hungry, right?
Oh, yeah, totally guilty of that.
But if you ate the same number of calories in, say, a baked potato with some veggies, you'd probably feel much more satisfied. There's also this 2024 study published in the journal Nutrients. It found that people who ate more UPFs tended to have higher BMIs, and they were less likely to stick to a Mediterranean diet, which is generally considered pretty healthy.
Right, the Mediterranean diet, lots of fruits, veggies, whole grains, the good stuff.
Exactly. So it seems like there's a connection there.
And when we zoom out and look at the global picture, obesity rates have, well, skyrocketed, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, back in 1975, it was around 4% globally. By 2016, it had more than tripled to 13%. It's a huge increase.
Huge. So can we directly link that rise in obesity to this like takeover of UPFs?
It's tough to say definitively that one caused the other, but the timing is definitely interesting. And we're starting to understand some of the mechanisms at play. See, UPFs are often loaded with sugar and unhealthy fats, and those can trigger the release of dopamine in our brains.
Dopamine, like the feel-good chemical.
Yep, that's the one. It's part of our reward system. So basically, you eat these foods, you get a hit of dopamine, and it creates this cycle of wanting more and more. Plus, UPFs are often digested really quickly, which can throw off how our bodies regulate hormones like, you guessed it, insulin.
Right, insulin. Our old friend, or maybe our frenemy, it feels like carbs get a lot of blame for weight gain, too. Like, are they good or bad? It's so confusing.
That's a great point. It brings us to something really important. It's not so much about the amount of carbs you eat, but the type of carbs that really matters.
Okay, so spill the tea. What types of carbs should we be watching out for?
The ones that cause trouble are refined carbohydrates. The white bread, the white rice, those kinds of things. They have what's called a high glycemic index.
High glycemic index. Okay, I've heard that term thrown around, but what does it actually mean for our bodies? Like, what's going on in there?
Basically, a high glycemic index means that these foods cause your blood sugar levels to spike really rapidly. And when that happens, your body freaks out a little and releases a bunch of insulin to try and deal with all that extra sugar flooding your system.
So it's like this big sugar rush followed by an insulin crash.
Kind of, yeah. And these rapid swings in blood sugar and insulin, they're not good for us. They can make our bodies more likely to store energy as fat.
So it's not just the calories in those refined carbs that matter, but how they affect our insulin levels too. Makes sense.
Exactly. And this idea is at the heart of something called the carbohydrate insulin model, or CIM for short. It's been getting a lot of attention lately, especially after a big study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2021.
CIM. Okay, so what's the CIM's take on all this?
Well, it suggests that eating too many of these refined carbs leads to our pancreas working overtime, pumping out tons of insulin. And that extra insulin is like a signal to our bodies, telling them to store that energy as fat, which of course goes against that whole calories in, calories out thing we've all heard a million times.
Right. So it's more nuanced than just how much we're eating.
Exactly. Now, it's worth noting that the CIM is still being debated in the scientific community. Not everyone agrees with it.
Of course, there's always more to the story. But is there any evidence from, like, real-world studies to back up this idea that high GI diets are linked to weight gain?
Actually, yeah, there's quite a bit. There have been these huge studies called prospective cohort studies, where researchers follow massive groups of people over long periods of time. And collectively, these studies have included over 1 million people.
1 million people? That's like a whole city.
I know, right? And the results have been pretty consistent. They show a clear link between diets high in glycemic index and a greater risk of obesity and metabolic diseases, especially the kind that involve that deep internal fat called visceral fat.
Visceral fat. Yeah, we got to talk about that. That's the stuff that's like wrapped around our organs, right? Not the kind you can pinch.
Exactly. We'll circle back to that for sure. But first, let's talk about fats themselves, because, not all fats are created equal when it comes to weight gain.
Yeah, fats have definitely gotten a bad rap over the years. But there are good fats and bad fats, right?
You got it. And there's actually some really cool research on this. In 2022, a study was published in Scientific Reports where they compared the effects of 12 different types of dietary fat. And what they found was pretty fascinating. Saturated fats, the kind you find in things like lard, were much more likely to cause weight gain and fat buildup in the liver compared to unsaturated fats, like the ones you get from fish oil.
So, bacon grease, bad. Salmon, good. Got it. What about the gut bacteria? You mentioned something about that earlier.
Ah, yes. The gut microbiome. It's amazing how much we're learning about the role it plays in our health. And it turns out that saturated fats can mess with the balance of bacteria in our gut, not in a good way.
So, like throwing off the good bacteria and letting the bad guys take over?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
For example, saturated fats can reduce the levels of a specific bacterium called Akkermansia mucinifila. And this particular bacteria has actually been linked to better fat loss. They've even done studies in mice, and the results were pretty dramatic. Mice that ate a diet high in saturated fats gained something like 20–30% more weight than mice that ate a diet with more polyunsaturated fats. Those mice only gained about 10–15%. So pretty big difference.
Wow, yeah, that's a significant difference. Okay, so we've got UPFs, the type of carbs we eat, and now the type of fats, all playing a role in this weight gain puzzle. Are there any other, sneaky culprits we should be aware of, stuff we might not even think about?
There are. We're starting to understand the impact of things called obesogens. They're basically environmental chemicals that can mess with our hormones.
Environmental chemicals? Ugh, okay,
Think BPA, which is found in some plastics.
Yeah.
And certain pesticides, too. They can act as endocrine disruptors, meaning they could interfere with how our hormones work, which can, in turn, make us more prone to gaining weight.
How do they actually do that? Like, what's the mechanism?
Well, they can affect how our fat cells develop or how sensitive we are to insulin, for example. There have been studies in animals where they exposed mice to BPA, and even when they ate the same number of calories as mice that weren't exposed, they still gained more weight, like 15–20% more fat mass. It's kind of freaky.
It's like these chemicals are working against us, making it harder to stay at a healthy weight.
It seems that way, yeah. And remember, our gut bacteria, they play a role here too.
The gut microbiome, always coming back to that. It really is a key player.
It is. Research from 2023 shows that diets high in those pesky UPFs can actually reduce the diversity of our gut bacteria. And that's not a good thing, because a more diverse gut microbiome is linked to better overall health.
Okay, but how does that tie back to weight gain?
So when our gut bacteria diversity decreases, it can lead to a drop in the production of short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. And these SCFAs are super important because they basically act as fuel for the cells that line our gut. They also play a big role in how our bodies metabolize energy and store fat.
So if we're not producing enough of these SCFAs, our metabolism might not be working as efficiently.
Right. And that can contribute to weight gain.
Okay. So it's not just one thing, right? It's this whole complex interplay of factors. Our diet, our environment, our gut health. It's a lot. Now, let's go back to that visceral fat. You said it's different from the fat we can, like, pinch. What's so special about it?
So visceral fat is unique because of where it lives. It's deep inside your belly, surrounding your organs, not just under your skin like subcutaneous fat, the kind we can see and feel. And it's not just about location. Visceral fat is also more metabolically active, which means it churns out more hormones and inflammatory substances. And it's super sensitive to insulin and stress hormones like cortisol.
So is it harder to lose? Because that's what everyone says, right? That belly fat is the toughest to get rid of.
It's funny, some research actually suggests that visceral fat might respond more quickly to diet and exercise at first, but the catch is it seems to have this higher metabolic resistance.
Metabolic resistance. Okay, break that down for me.
Basically, it means you need to be more consistent with your efforts over time to really see a significant reduction in visceral fat. It's like it takes more to convince it to budge. There was this 2020 study on high-intensity interval training, HIIT. They found that after 8 weeks, people lost 14% of their visceral fat, but only 7% of their subcutaneous fat.
So it's kind of like easier to lose, but harder to start losing.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And what about genetics and stress? Do they play a role in how much visceral fat we have?
Absolutely. It seems like our genes have a bigger influence on how much visceral fat we store compared to subcutaneous fat. And chronic stress, because it pumps out that cortisol, can specifically encourage visceral fat to build up. So even if you're eating pretty well, if you're constantly stressed, it can work against you.
Stress. It always seems to come back to bite us. Well, this is where things get kind of scary. Research from the Mayo Clinic back in 2021 found that when people have acute illnesses, like pancreatitis, for example, the rapid breakdown of unsaturated fatty acids into visceral fat can release toxic fatty acids into the bloodstream. And those toxic fatty acids can actually worsen inflammation and contribute to organ failure.
So it's like a double whammy. You get sick, and then your own fat starts attacking you.
Kind of, yeah. It's a pretty wild finding, and it might even help explain something called the obesity paradox.
The obesity paradox. Okay, that sounds intriguing. What is that all about? Basically, it's this observation that in some acute critical illnesses, people who have a higher BMI might actually have better outcomes. It's counterintuitive, right? But the thinking is that it might be because the saturated fats in visceral fat break down more slowly. So in those situations, having more body fat might actually be protective. It's complicated.
That's wild. So what else makes visceral fat so, I don't know, dangerous?
It's a whole bunch of things, really. There are these inflammatory substances that visceral fat releases, like IL-6 and TNF, and those can actually cross the blood-brain barrier.
The blood-brain barrier, that's like the protective shield around our brains, right?
Yep, that's the one. And there's research from 2023 showing that these inflammatory substances can cause damage in the hippocampus, which is a crucial part of the brain for memory.
Oh, no. So visceral fat could be messing with our brains.
It seems that way, yeah. And this damage to the hippocampus has been linked to an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. And we're not talking about a small increase. We're talking about a potential 30–40% higher risk.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. The thinking is that this inflammation might contribute to insulin resistance in the brain, which messes with how brain cells use glucose for energy.
Wow. So it's not just about how we look or even about our hearts and other organs. It could be affecting our brains in the long term.
Exactly. And it gets even crazier. Visceral fat can also mess with the environment around tumors.
Okay, that sounds bad.
Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah.
There was a study published in Nature in 2022 done in mice that showed that when visceral fat increases, it can actually alter how fat cells and immune cells, specifically T cells, compete for fats.
Compete for fats? I don't get it.
Basically, it throws off the balance.
Mm-hmm.
And this can weaken the immune system's ability to keep tabs on things, which is obviously not good when you have a tumor growing. In the study, the mice with more visceral fat had tumors that grew about 50% faster.
50% faster. Man, visceral fat is some seriously bad news. It's not just passive storage, it's messing with our whole bodies.
Okay, this is heavy stuff. Let's switch gears for a minute and talk about something you mentioned earlier, which is how our idea of the ideal body has changed so much over time. Like, why were people so into being plump back in the day?
Yeah, it's a fascinating shift in perspective, isn't it? If you look back through history, you'll find that in many cultures, both in the East and West, a fuller figure was seen as a positive thing, something to aspire to.
Okay, so like a sign of wealth or good health.
Exactly. And it was often tied to the economic and social realities of the time.
I'm curious about the East. You mentioned China specifically, right?
Yeah, China's a great example, particularly during the Tang Dynasty, which lasted from 618 to 907 AD. This was a really prosperous period in Chinese history, and they had a very specific ideal of beauty for women. They called it yu, which is pronounced fengyu.
Fengyu, what does that mean? It translates to plumpness or well-roundedness, and it was associated with all sorts of good things like wealth, good fortune, and a life free from hard labor. One of those famous beauties in Chinese history, Yang Guifei, was known for her fuller figure. There's even a line in a famous poem about her, Chonghen Ger, that describes her beauty in a way that really emphasizes her fullness.
So it was like, if you were plump, it meant you had enough to eat and didn't have to spend your days toiling in the fields.
Precisely. It was a sign that you were living a comfortable life, that you had status. And you can see this reflected in the art of the Tang Dynasty, too. There's this famous painting called Lyria, or Ladies with Hairpins, that depicts these elegant court ladies, all with full figures and these serene expressions.
It's amazing how art can give us these glimpses into the past, isn't it? What about in the West? Were they into plumpness too?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if you go way, way back to prehistoric times, there are those famous Venus figurines like the Venus of Willendorf. These sculptures clearly emphasize curves, and they were likely symbols of fertility and abundance.
Makes sense, right? Like being able to bear children and provide for them was a big deal.
Exactly. And then as you move into the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, from about the 5th to the 17th centuries, plumpness continued to be associated with wealth and good health, especially in Europe, where food shortages were pretty common.
So, again, it comes down to having enough to eat.
Right. If you were plump, it meant you were well-fed, which was a sign of status. Think about the paintings of Peter Paul Rubens. He was obsessed with full-figured women. His painting The Three Graces, for example, depicts these women who, at the time, were considered the epitome of beauty.
So basically having curves was like the ultimate flex. It's funny how things have changed, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, now the modern ideal, especially in the West, but increasingly globally, is all about thinness. And this shift has been influenced by so many things, from the abundance of food in developed countries to the rise of mass media and the fashion industry.
It's crazy how much our perceptions are shaped by the world around us, isn't it? Like, what we find beautiful is totally subjective and changes over time. Okay, let's bring it all back to our original question. Is insulin making us fat? After all this talk about UPFs and historical beauty standards, where does insulin actually fit in?
Okay, so insulin. As we discussed earlier, it's a hormone that plays a key role in how our bodies handle sugar, or glucose. It helps our cells take in glucose from the bloodstream to use for energy, or it helps store it as fat for later use. Insulin also puts a stop to fat breakdown.
Okay, so it's involved in both storing fat and preventing fat from being used for energy.
Exactly. So if you have chronically high levels of insulin in your blood, yeah, it can definitely promote fat storage.
So those people who blame insulin for the obesity epidemic, they're not totally wrong.
They've got a point, but it's definitely not the whole story. It's more nuanced than that. For example, in conditions like type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, the body has to pump out way more insulin just to keep blood sugar levels under control. And if you're constantly eating refined carbs and sugary foods, your blood sugar is going to be on this roller coaster ride, spiking and crashing all the time. And that, of course, means your insulin levels are going to be all over the place, too.
Right, all those sugar rushes followed by insulin crashes. We talked about that earlier.
Yep, and over time, that can definitely lead to more fat being stored. There's also the fact that some people with type 1 diabetes experience weight gain when they start taking insulin.
That's interesting. Why does that happen?
It can be related to dosage adjustments, or sometimes it's because their diet changes when they start insulin therapy.
Gotcha. So it's not a simple cause and effect thing.
Not at all.
But you said that insulin isn't the main driver of weight gain for most people.
Right. Exactly. It's important to remember that insulin doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's part of a larger system. For the vast majority of people, the main driver of weight gain is still that simple equation, taking in more calories than you burn. In other words, a calorie surplus.
Right. So if you're consistently eating more than your body needs, you're going to gain weight regardless of insulin.
Exactly. And in healthy individuals, the release of insulin after a meal is totally normal and natural. It's just part of how our metabolism works. It doesn't automatically lead to obesity. Actually, think about it this way. In untreated type 1 diabetes, the body doesn't produce enough insulin, or sometimes any insulin at all. And what happens? People lose weight, often quite dramatically, because their bodies can't use glucose for energy effectively and start breaking down fat and muscle for fuel instead.
Oh, right. So if insulin were the sole culprit for weight gain, you'd think people with type 1 diabetes would be like super lean, right?
Exactly. But that's not the case.
Okay, so is the consensus among scientists that things like our overall diet and lifestyle are bigger factors in the obesity epidemic than just insulin levels alone?
Yeah, that's the current understanding. The research really points to dietary patterns, especially those high in sugar, unhealthy fats, and you guessed it, ultra-processed foods, as being major culprits. Combined with a lack of physical activity and, of course, genetic predispositions, these are the big drivers of weight gain. Insulin is definitely part of the equation. It plays a role in how our bodies manage energy. But it's just one piece of a very complex puzzle.
Right, so we got to be careful about pointing the finger at insulin and saying, you're the bad guy. It's not that simple.
Exactly. It's about the bigger picture.
So this idea that insulin is single-handedly making us fat, it comes from a misunderstanding of how it actually works in our bodies, especially when you consider the kinds of foods most of us are eating these days.
I nailed it. It's about the overall dietary pattern, the types of food we choose, our activity levels, and our individual metabolism, not just insulin doing its thing in isolation.
Okay, wow. This has been a seriously deep dive. We covered so much ground. So for our listeners out there, what are the key takeaways? What do you want them to remember?
All right, so key takeaways. Number one, those ultra-processed foods and refined carbs, they're big trouble. They mess with our appetite, our insulin levels, and ultimately, our weight. Number two, fat is not the enemy, but the type of fat matters. Unsaturated fats, good. Saturated fats, not so much.
Okay, got it. What else?
Number three, visceral fat, that deep fat around our organs, is a sneaky little devil. It's metabolically active, meaning it's up to no good, and it's linked to all sorts of health problems.
And we learned that it's more influenced by genetics and stress than we might think.
Right. Number four, this whole idea of the ideal body, totally made up. It's changed so much throughout history, and it really reflects the values and economic conditions of different societies.
And finally, insulin, it's part of the weight gain equation, but it's not the only factor, and it doesn't act alone. It's about the bigger picture. So the big so what for you, dear listener, is this. Understanding all this stuff, all these nuances, can really help you make better choices for your health. It's about knowledge, not blindly following the latest diet craze.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, here's a final thought to ponder. We talked about how, historically, being plump was often seen as a good thing, a sign of abundance. And now, we're obsessed with thinness in a world that's overflowing with food. It kind of makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what does that say about our relationship with our bodies and with food in general? Is our fear of fat really just about health, or is there something deeper going on, something cultural, something societal?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Definitely something to ponder.
For sure. And if any of this resonated with you, or if you have more questions, we encourage you to keep exploring. Read those studies, dive deeper into the topics that sparked your interest. Your curiosity is what keeps us going, so keep those questions coming.
Absolutely, we're in this together.
And you know what? If you're looking for a little more adventure inspiration, our friend's YouTube channel, Mickytolife, is the perfect place to find it.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for joining us on Sip and Talk.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.